Okay, what is up there, YouTube? This is J-Man Time, and today I have a video on surviving warships. And today's topic is going to be on surviving warships from the old Imperial Russian Navy, dating back all the way to the 1860s until 1918. These are pretty much the last surviving warships from the old Tsar Navy, or the Romanov Navy. Towards the end of World War I, the Imperial Russian Navy dissolved as a result of the February and October revolutions of 1917 and 1918. And as a result, most of the ships were either sunk or were later taken over by either the white or red Russian forces. During the Russian Civil War, a large number of these ships were either scrapped or captured by enemy forces, including the British. After World War I, many of the old Imperial Russian Navy ships were actually retained by the newly formed Soviet Navy, and some of them managed to survive even through the Cold War. Some of the old Tsar warships still survive to this very day in various countries that were once part of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Empire. So let's go over some of the last surviving warships from the old Imperial Russian Navy of the 1860s through early 1910s. And the first ship on the list is the Imperial Russian Monitor Strelets from 1864. Strelets was a Uragan-Class Monitor that was constructed between 1863 and 1864. She actually served in the Baltic Fleet based in the Gulf of Finland between 1864 and 1900. She had a displacement of 1,626 tons. Her main armament at the end of her service were two 9-inch 229mm rifled main guns. Her armor thickness was 127 to 203 millimeters of iron. And she had a speed of 6 knots or 11 kilometers per hour or 6.9 miles per hour. And she had a crew of 100. Now, being a Uragan-class monitor, she actually had sister ships, and she also served as one of the many monitors in the Russian Baltic Fleet and also the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Not much really happened to Strelets during her military service, as most of the action happening between Imperial Russia and its enemies happened in the east between the Russians and the Ottomans. So in the Baltic region, there was no conflicts happening between Russia or any of the Baltic states like Sweden, Norway, or Denmark, as Finland was part of the Russian Empire at this point. Now fast forward to the year 1900, the ship was actually decommissioned and converted into a floating workshop in 1901, known as the Plavmasterskaia No. 1. And she actually remained as a floating workshop all the way up until the end of World War II. Afterward, she was pretty much lost or abandoned from the 1950s all the way up until the year 2015. Yes, this ship was basically ignored. The reason Strelets survived this long is because she was pretty much ignored by the Russian Navy, only to be rediscovered, abandoned in a shipyard in St. Petersburg in 2015. As of 2020, the Strelets is still waiting for restoration to be converted into a museum ship where she will rest forever alongside the next ship on this list, the Russian cruiser Aurora. And that brings us to the next ship on this list, the Russian Protected Cruiser Aurora. Aurora is a Pallada-Class Protected Cruiser that was constructed between 1896 and 1903. She actually served in the Russo-Japanese War, which lasted from 1904 to 1905. During that time period, she was actually part of Admiral Zinovy reinforcement squadron that was sent to Port Arthur in the Liaoning province of China in 1904. This ultimately failed as the Russian military based in Port Arthur could not hold off the invading Japanese forces, and the Japanese forces would take Port Arthur and sink or damage most, if not all, of the Russian ships that were already based in Port Arthur. By the time Aurora and her squadron got even halfway to Port Arthur, the fighting was already over, and the ships were later recalled back to Russia. Afterwards, she was later sent to be part of Admiral Oscar's cruiser squadron, which was actually part of a much larger Russian Far Eastern fleet of 11 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 9 destroyers, which were under the command of Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky, sent to reinforce the Vladivostok region of Russia's Far East. But in order to get there, they actually had to traverse around Africa and the coast of India, and they would have to go through Japanese and Korean waters, which were infested with Japanese warships. The Russians had actually managed to get as far as they could, but ultimately they had to go through the Strait of Tsushima, which was a strait between Korea and Japan. And this area was heavily monitored by the Imperial Japanese Navy. Ultimately, the Russian fleet would engage Admiral Tōgō's much larger Japanese fleet in what was known as the Battle of Tsushima in 1905. During this battle, the Russian fleet was obliterated, annihilated, wiped out. Out of all of the capital ships, all of the Russian battleships were either sunk or captured. Aurora managed to escape to the U.S. military base in Manila, and 2 destroyers managed to make it to Vladivostok. Now, this was a humiliating, but luckily Aurora managed to outsmart the Japanese by outrunning them and managed to get away without being sunk like many of the other Russian cruisers that were part of Admiral Zinovy's fleet. Later on in World War I, Aurora operated out of the Black Sea, either operating as a patrolling cruiser or as a shore bombardment vessel, helping the Russian forces repel the German and Austro-Hungarian invasion of Russia. And this lasted all the way up until 1917. In 1917, Aurora's crew mutinied against the Tsar Russian government in what was known as the February Revolution, which was a massive anti-government protest that was happening all across Russia in February of 1917. She was actually taken over by the Bolsheviks, or the communist revolutionaries, and was used as a command post by the Bolsheviks during the second revolution, known as the October Revolution of 1917. And this revolution would go on to spark the Russian Civil War. During the Russian Civil War, Aurora would serve as one of the many ships in the newly formed Soviet or Red Navy, and she would go on to survive the Russian Civil War. After the Russian Civil War, she was used as a training ship all the way up until 1941. In 1941, Germany and the Axis powers invaded the Soviet Union, and she was pressed back into service and sent to Leningrad along with several other ships in order to help repel the advancing Axis forces who were trying to encircle the city of Leningrad. And this was known as the Siege of Leningrad and lasted from 1941 until 1944. During the Siege of Leningrad, she was used as a bombardment vessel in an attempt to hold off the Germans from capturing the city. And during the siege, she was actually bombed and sunk by the German Luftwaffe. But even after being sunk, she was still firing her guns at enemy forces trying to capture the city. Ultimately, the siege of Leningrad would be lifted in 1944, and the ship remained sunk for the rest of the war. In the 1950s, the ship was actually raised and repaired, and she served as a training ship again until 1957. In 1957, she was converted into a museum ship where she can be seen today in the St. Petersburg harbor. She is the only protected cruiser still serving to this very day. In fact, the Russian cruiser Aurora was never decommissioned, and she is listed as an active commissioned warship in the Russian Navy and actually has a crew. She is also one of only 2 protected cruisers left. The other protected cruiser is the Italian cruiser Pugila, which is in Italy. And so there you have it. That was the Russian protected cruiser Aurora from 1903. Aurora's main armament was 14 152mm 6-inch main guns. Her secondary armament was 24 75mm 3-inch 50 caliber secondary guns, 8 37mm anti-torpedo boat guns, and she was also given 3 torpedo tubes. Later on, an additional 4 76.2mm anti-aircraft guns were installed during the First World War, along with one 40mm British-made 2-pounder anti-aircraft gun, which was actually a new type of anti-aircraft system introduced towards the middle of World War I. The ship had a speed of 19 knots, or 35 kilometers per hour, or 22 miles per hour, and she had a crew of 590. The next surviving warship from the old Imperial Russian Navy is the Russo-Finnish icebreaker Taramo from 1907. The Taramo was a naval icebreaker that was constructed in 1907. The ship had a displacement of 1,574 tons. Her main armament during the First World War was either one or two 47mm 1.9-inch main guns. Her speed was 13 knots, or 24 kilometers per hour, or 15 miles per hour, and she had a crew of 43. Now, during the First World War, Taramo actually served in the city of Hanko and also in the Bay of Bothnian and the Gulf of Finland. Now, keep in mind, Finland was part of the Russian Empire at this time, but Taramo had a mixture of Russian and Finnish sailors manning her during the First World War. And during World War I, she served as a basic naval icebreaker. Her job was to break through the ice in the Gulf of Finland during the winter months in order to help the Russian warships keep the Russian warships from being damaged by pack ice. Later on, in 1917, during the Russian Civil War, there was also the Finnish Civil War. The Finnish Civil War was a war between the White Finnish Army and the Red Finnish Army. And during this time period, Taramo was under the control of the Red Finnish Army, or the Communist forces, based in the city of Helsinki, based in the port of Helsinki. During the year of 1918, the Finnish crew on board Taramo mutinied and took over the ship from the Communist Reds and sailed the ship to Tallinn in Estonia, which was under German control. From there, Taramo was taken over by the Germans, and her weapons were increased to two 75mm deck guns. Later on, she was used as a troop transport vessel for transporting German troops to the islands of Nisar and Susar during the German intervention in the Estonian Civil War of 1918. Later on, she was given back to Finland. Afterwards, she served in the Finnish Navy all the way up until the Second World War. During World War II, she was pressed back into service and was used as an icebreaker throughout the Second World War, but never encountered any Russian warships. After World War II, she would serve in the Cold War era Finnish Navy, all the way up until 1969. In 1969, the Taramo was finally retired and converted into a museum ship, but this took 20 years because Finland's economy wasn't doing so well at various points in the 1970s and 80s. But finally, in 1992, the ship was finally converted into a museum ship, and she can be seen today at the Maritime Museum in Finland, in Kotka, Finland, as the last surviving World War I era Finnish warship, although she was largely under Russian control until 1918. The next ship on the list is the Sertool. The Sertool is a Russo-Estonian naval icebreaker that was constructed in 1913. Her original name was the Tsar Mikhail Feodorovich, and she was constructed in 1913 for the Imperial Russian Navy. So her displacement was 3,619 tons. Her main armament during the First World War was four 76.2mm main guns, or 3-inch guns. Her speed was 13.5 knots, or 24.5 miles per hour, 24.5 kilometers per hour, or 15.5 miles per hour, and she had a crew of 65. Now, during the First World War, the Sertool, or the Tsar Mikhail Feodorovich, was actually based in the city of Tallinn in the Baltic Sea, and she served as an icebreaker between there and the Russian city or port of Kronstadt in the Gulf of Finland. And that was pretty much her job during the First World War. In 1917, the Sertool was manned by the Russian, Finnish, and Estonian Volian Guard Regiment, which later mutinied in 1917 during the February and October revolutions that were sweeping through Russia and the Russian-controlled regions of the Baltic states. Later on, her crew would join the Bolshevik Reds, and they would take over the area. they would help to take over the area of Kronstadt. In 1918, she was later hijacked by Finnish agents disguised as sailors and was transported to the island of Kuvasaari. She was later transferred to Finland, where she was renamed Väinämöinen until 1922. Later on, in 1922, she was given to Estonia, where she was given the name Sertool and would serve in the Estonian fleet until 1940. In 1940, she was captured again by the Soviet government when the Soviet government annexed Estonia and Latvia in 1940. This was during the German-Soviet non-aggression pact, where both Germany and the Soviet Union would go on to annex pretty much most, if not all, of the countries around them, with the exception of Sweden and Switzerland. She would serve in the Soviet Estonian Navy all the way up until 1987. In 1991, she was actually given back to Estonia and was later converted into a museum ship, which she can still be seen today at the Estonian Maritime Museum, also known as the Seaplane Harbor, in the port of Tallinn, in the city of Tallinn. The next ship on the list is the Russian icebreaker Krasin from 1916-1917. The Krasin was a Russian naval icebreaker that served towards the very end of World War I and at the very start of the Russian Revolution / Russian Civil War. The Krasin had a displacement of 5,484 tons. Her main armament during World War I was 476mm 3-inch guns. Her speed was 9.8 knots, or 18.1 kilometers per hour, or 11.2 miles per hour, and she had a crew of 60 to 100. Now, when the ship was launched in 1917, there was already a revolution happening in Russia, the February Revolution, and later on, the October Revolution. During that time period, she was based in the city or port of Kronstadt and was later taken over by the Bolsheviks, just like the other ships on this list. She was only captured for a short period of time, but later on, she was captured by the Royal Navy, the British Royal Navy, during the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War, which lasted from 1918 through 1919. During that time period, she was scuttled first, but then was later raised in the same year of 1918, and she was later converted into a minesweeper by the British, and she was actually transferred all the way back to the British base at Scapa Flow. In 1921, she was actually given back to the USSR and was given the name Krasin in 1927. Her original name was Save Tōgō. In 1941, during the Second World War, she served as a Russian convoy escort ship and was used to bring war materials from the United States to the Soviet Union as part of the Lend-Lease trade agreement between the USSR and the United States. In 1941, again, she was later loaned to the U.S. and was used by the United States Coast Guard, by the American Coast Guard in Greenland from 1941 until 1945. During that time period, the Americans actually repaired and upgraded the Krasin's equipment, and they also overhauled part of the ship's hull and superstructure. Later on, in 1946, she was given back to the Soviet Union and was later sent to East Germany. In East Germany, she was later used in the East German Navy. And later on, in 1957, she was given a major overhaul, which included a reconstruction of her superstructure, and she was also given more modern equipment. And she would later serve in the East German Navy as both an icebreaker and Arctic research vessel, all the way up until 1971. Later on, in the 1980s, she was actually used as a cheap improvised car ferry for bringing European cars to Russia, all the way up until 1989. In the 1990s, the old icebreaker was actually sold to the U.S. for scrap, to be broken up as scrap metal. But the deal actually failed, and the ship was instead refurbished into a museum ship in Kronstadt Harbor, next to the Aurora, the cruiser Aurora. And she can actually be seen to this very day in Kronstadt or St. Petersburg, right next to the old protected cruiser Aurora to this very day. And then finally, there's the last ship on the list, That is the old Imperial Russian submarine salvage vessel Kamuna, which was also a submarine salvage vessel and repair ship that was constructed between 1912 and 1913. In 1912, the ship was actually known as the Volkhov, and the Volkhov was constructed in St. Petersburg as both a submarine salvage vessel and general repair ship. She was based in Reval during the First World War and served upwards to 60 Allied submarines per month during the First World War. Later on, she too was taken over by the Bolsheviks during the February and October revolutions of 1917 and 1918. And she would also go on to serve in the newly formed Soviet Navy. During World War II, she was actually based in the city of Leningrad with the cruiser Aurora. And she also served in the Lake Ladoga region too. Her job was to repair Soviet ships both in Leningrad and in Lake Ladoga so that they could help lift the German siege of Leningrad. And the siege would last for 4 years until 1944. After World War II, the ship was slightly modernized for the newly formed post-World War II Soviet Navy, and she actually still serves to this very day in the modern Russian fleet of the Russian Federal Republic, the Russian Federation. She can actually still be seen to this very day, traveling with the modern Russian Navy, doing her original job of servicing Soviet and Russian era submarines. These are mostly old Cold War submarines, but there are some new Russian submarines that were built in the 90s and early 2000s. So there you have it. The Kamuna, also known as the Volkhov, is literally the oldest salvage vessel still in service to this very day. This ship here is literally the same age as the RMS Titanic, the legendary ocean liner that sank in 1912. So we literally have a Titanic-aged vessel that is still in active service as a naval vessel. These are the last of the old Imperial Russian Navy warships from the 1860s through 1918. Which of these were your favorite? If I had to choose, obviously it would be the Aurora, as the cruiser Aurora actually had the most extensive naval history, serving in 3 wars: the Russo-Japanese War, the First World War, the Russian Civil War, and World War II, and even the Cold War. So actually she served in about 5 or 6 different conflicts. So she has the most military or naval history under her belt. But what do you all think of these warships? Please tell me in the comments section below. And until next time, this was J-Man Time, signing off.